Creative Writing and Stylistics. On the first paragraph, the purpose of this paragraph, it sets the stage and introduces the main topic, which is the connection between writing and linguistics. The, the main point of this code to write is to be a linguist. It establishes the core argument. This chapter focuses on the intersection of stylistics and creative writing. It also emphasized the relevance of this connection in both academic and practical setting. On the second paragraph, it defines stylistics and its role in analyzing literary texts. Stylistics is a branch of linguistics that examines language mechanics in literary texts, including the word choice, sentence structure, and voice, which helps to understand how these elements contribute to the meaning and impact of a text. On the third paragraph, it introduced the concept of the examined text and its application when it comes to writing. Stylistics can be used to analyze both strengths and weaknesses when it comes to writing. This chapter proposes that stylistics is valuable during the creative process, especially in revisions. On the fourth paragraph, it highlights the practical benefits of stylistics in creative writing workshops. Stylistics provide a common language for discussing technical issues. It also fosters deeper understanding among writers. While it is not a requirement for good writing, it encourages the writers to explore more about this for their to enhance their potential. On the fifth paragraph, it summarizes the benefits of stylistics for writers. Stylistic helps understand the why behind writing choices. It leads to a more conscious and deliberate approach when it comes to writing. This chapter is a bridge theory and practice demonstrating the value of stylistics for both academics and the writers. Historical perspective. So in this paragraph, they introduce here the three historical areas of study that have influenced the development of stylistics and understanding of literary writing as a craft. It highlights the long-standing interest in analyzing the mechanics of writing. It mentions here the classical poetics and rhetoric, formalism, and narratology as a key influence, suggesting that these areas of study have contributed to the current state of stylistics. It also sets the stage for a deeper exploration of these historical perspectives and their impact on the field of stylistics. Next is classical poets. On the first paragraph, they introduce here Plato's point of view on poetry as mimesis or imitation. Plato saw poetry as a reproduction of reality, which also called a game rather than a serious art of form. He, he contrasted this with diegesis, where the poet narrates directly. On the second paragraph, they discuss here Aristotle's poetic and its contribution to the literary theory. Aristotle, building on Plato, categorized the literary discourse and viewed poetry as a craft, emphasizing mimesis in creating engaging narrative. On third paragraph, it highlights the lasting impact of Plato and Aristotle on creative writing debates. Their work sparked as a debate about whether writing is a craft with rules or a product of inspiration. It also emphasizes the tension between writing mechanics and reading context, a tension still explored in stylistics and literary theory. So moving on to the Russian formalism, on the first paragraph, they introduce here the Russian formalism, which focuses on the performance or quality of the poetic language. Roman Jakobson's poetic function highlights the significance of linguistic form drawing the attention to itself. This function is present in all language, not just in literature. On the second paragraph, they explain here the Michael's Bacon's theory of dialogism and its application to literary texts. Bacon sees discourse as a struggle between voice, including writer-reader, narrator-character, and character-character. He argues that fiction, heteroglossia, or multiple voices makes it more vibrant than poetry. The writer, like a ventriloquist, manipulates his voice for artistic effect. The lesson for writer is to embrace language's diversity in it. And next reporter, please.
Narratology. What is narratology? Narratology, a discipline focusing on narrative structures and their effects. It traces narratology's roots to classical poetics and Russian formalism, highlighting its evolution into a multidisciplinary field. Initially tied to structuralism, narratology sought universal patterns of storytelling but has since embraced broader, more diverse applications in fields like psychology and philosophy. So these are the important key points. Number 1. Interplay of story and discourse. Narratology distinguishes between the fabula, the story, and sujet, the discourse, emphasizing how the same set of events can be structured differently to achieve various effects. This separation highlights the flexibility and creativity inherent in storytelling. For example, a murder mystery might begin with a discovery of a body. It is the discourse, rather than the murder itself, the story, creating suspense and encouraging readers to piece the story together. Such manipulation of order allows writers to evoke curiosity, create emotional resonance, or subvert expectations. Practical example: Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction disrupts chronological order, creating multiple layers of meaning and heightening viewer engagement. Number 2. Jeanette's contribution. Order, altering the sequence of events. Like, for example, flashbacks, foreshadowing, can change the reader's perceptions, intensify suspense, or provide a fresh perspective. Duration. By manipulating the pacing of events, writers can emphasize what's important or create contrast. For instance, compressing 20 years past emphasizes brevity, while extending a short moment with detail can highlight its emotional weight. Voice. Jeanette's classifications narrator's insight. Intradiegetic or outsider. Extradiegetic, the story and participating. Homodiegetic or the observing. Heterodiegetic, offer clarity in analyzing storytelling perspectives. For instance, Heart of Darkness uses an intradiegetic narrators or the Marlowe to create a layered narrative structure, adding complexity. Number 3. Applications. Narratology is not limited to academic theory. It provides writers with a toolkit for analyzing and refining narratives. By understanding narrative techniques systematically, writers can better predict their effects. For example, a slow discourse time builds tension in a thriller. Changing focalization can reveal hidden motives or create dramatic irony, such as shifting from an omniscient narrator to a character's biased viewpoint. This structured approach helps bridge the gap between intuition and deliberate craft, allowing writers to experiment more confidently. Number 4. Relevance to create practice. To creative practice. Narratology enhances both analysis and creation of narratives, making it a practical discipline for writers. Narratology empowers writers to make intentional choices about plot structure, pacing, and perspective. For instance, should a story unfold chronologically or begin in medias res? Or should a narrator reveal everything, or should readers discover details through a character's limited perspective? Well, writers can also use narratological insights to revise their work, ensuring that their narrative techniques align with the intended effects. Narratology is more than an academic field. It is a practical guide for understanding and crafting engaging, meaningful narratives. By mastering concepts like order, duration, and voice, writers can push creative boundaries while maintaining clarity and coherence. This makes narratology an essential tool for both analyzing existing works and developing new ones. Critical issues and topics. Historical foundation of stylistics. The significance of stylistics as both an analytical and practical tool in creative writing. By situating stylistics within the philosophical debates of Plato and Aristotle, it bridges theoretical and practical concerns, offering writers a roadmap for crafting effective narratives. Mimesis and diegesis. The distinction between showing and telling is a cornerstone of modern creative writing. Mimesis immerses readers by allowing them to infer meaning from characters' actions or dialogue, while diegesis provide direct explanations. The continuum between these modes offers flexibility for writers to shape their narratives according to their goals. For instance, fast-paced scenes might rely on diegesis to maintain momentum, while emotional climaxes benefit from mimesis to heighten readers' engagement. Transparency and opacity. The transparency-opacity continuum adds another layer to narrative crafting. Transparent language facilitates ease of understanding, making it suitable for exposition or straightforward storytelling. In contrast, opacity challenges readers by introducing linguistic deviations that defamiliarize everyday concepts. Writers can use this balance to cater to different audiences, keeping language transparent for clarity but integrating opacity for artistic depth. Linguistic deviation as a creative tool. Deviation from linguistic norms is a hallmark of literary language. By breaking expectations, it prompts readers to reconsider familiar ideas, deepening their connection to the text. For instance, metaphors or innovative syntax can create memorable imagery or convey complex emotions. However, excessive deviations risk alienating readers, highlighting the need for moderation. Practical application of stylistics. For creative practitioners, stylistics provides actionable insights. Writers can experiment with showing versus telling and transparency versus opacity to align their narrative style with their intended audience and themes. For example, a literary short story might emphasize opacity to invite deep analysis, whereas a children's book would prioritize transparency for accessibility. challenges, and balance. The interplay between these stylistic elements requires careful calibration. Over-reliance on showing can overwhelm the readers with details, while excessive telling may result in disengaging narrative. Similarly, a highly transparent narratives might lack depth, while too much opacity could render the text inaccessible. Achieving balance is key, ensuring the narrative is both impactful and comprehensible. The text highlights the value of stylistics in enhancing creative writing. By understanding the balancing the dual lines of mimesis, diegesis, and transparency opacity, writers can create compelling narratives that resonate with readers. These stylistic principles not only enrich literary analysis but also serve as a practical toolkit for writers, enabling them to craft stories that are both accessible and artistically profound. Recommendation for practices: figurative language. Stylistics as an analytical approach helps writers understand the structural and functional aspects of language. By focusing on elements like phonemes, morphemes, and syntax, writers can manipulate language to create unique effects. The concept of linguistic derivation and foregrounding is crucial here, as it allows writers to emphasize specific aspects of their text, making language more striking and engaging. However, this can be a double-edged sword. Balance between innovation and clarity. While deviation from standard usage can refresh language, overuse risks alienating readers. For instance, writers like Martin Amis and Will Self employ deviations, but sometimes their stylistic choices overshadow the story itself, leading to a focus on language rather than narrative. Mimesis versus diegesis. Mimesis aims to immerse readers in narrative, making story world feel authentic, while diegesis highlights the act of storytelling itself. A balanced stylistic approach ensures neither overshadows the other, maintaining a dynamic interplay between immersion and self-awareness in the text. The exercises of figurative language emphasize the importance of self-critique. Writers are encouraged to explore stylistic deviation and then revise excessively deviant elements to evaluate their necessity. This iterative process fosters awareness of how linguistic choices shape meaning and readers' engagement. Point of view. The choice of point of view or POV profoundly impacts narrative style and reader experience. Stylistics introduces distinctions such as who tells, the narrator's position, heterodiegetic versus homodiegetic, determines the relationship to the story world, who sees, focalization or the perspective through which events are perceived influences how readers experience the narrative. The connection between narrative structure and cognitive stylistic is particularly enlightening. Text world theory, for example, suggests the narrators operate within a narrative universe or the text world, which can contain subworlds like flashbacks or imagined scenarios. Writers must decide whether the narrator is central to the story, or it is the homodiegetic, or external, the heterodiegetic, as this choice affects the narrative's immediacy and authority. Exercises like reimagining passages from Kazuo Ishiguro versus Virginia Woolf allows writers to explore the implications of different point of views. For instance, shifting from omniscient narration to a single character's perspective creates intimacy but limits the reader's understanding of the characters or events. Omniscient narration, while comprehensive, lack the emotional depth of a more focused perspective. These choices highlight the tension between limited perspectives and omniscient storytelling, while fixed focalization offers clarity and coherence. Variable focalization enriches the narrative by offering multiple viewpoints. Practical implications. The provided exercises emphasize critical reflection and creative rewriting as essential tool for writers. For example, revising figurative language, writing with excessive linguistic deviation, and then refining it encourages writers to identify what enhances or detracts from their works. This process cultivates a deeper understanding of stylistic balance. Exploring POV and focalization, rewriting passages from different perspectives exposes the nuances of narrative voice and helps writers assess the impact of their choices on reader engagement. For a broader insights, the discussion of figurative language and POV underscores a core principle of creative writing. Intentionality, writers must consciously balance stylistic innovation with clarity and ensure their choices serve the narrative. Key takeaways include for figurative language, use deviation sparingly to create vivid, memorable expressions without overwhelming the story world. For point of view, select POV and focalization strategies that align with the narrative's goals, whether the foster intimacy, broaden scope, or challenge reader expectation. By applying these insights, writers can enhance the expressive and communicative power of their work, ensuring the style complements the content and resonates with readers. This reflective, iterative approach promotes growth and mastery in creative writing.
So now let me discuss to you the representing the speech and thought. So in representing speech and thought in analysis, it refers to the way in which a narrator or author conveys what characters say and think in a text. This is a central area of study in stylistics and narratology because the way speech and thought are represented influences how characters are portrayed, how the information is conveyed, and also how the reader engages with the narrative. So in literary and linguistic analysis, speech is refers to verbal utterances made by characters, while thought refers to the inner mental processes of those characters. So often represented as a form of internal dialogue or consciousness. According to Kelman's novel, illustrates an interesting resolution of a common fictional dilemma, the ways in which an author's voice will often have a tendency to ride roughshod over those of his or her characters, literary language versus the democratic. Kelman evolves a technique whereby the heterodiegetic narrator and the protagonist speak on the same level and in the same voice. So according to James Kellman's novels, particularly in works like How Late It Was, How Late, the author grapples with a common tension in literature: the conflict between an authorial voice, or often formal, controlled, and literary, and the voices of characters, which may be more colloquial, fragmented, and reflective of their social and cultural backgrounds. This tension often leads to a situation where the author's voice, with its distinct narrative style, can dominate or overshadow the more authentic voices of the characters, a dilemma that many writers face when representing speech and thought in their work. So, Kellman's innovative solution to this dilemma involves a technique where the heterodiegetic narrator, or the narrator who is outside of the story and does not participate in the action, and the protagonist speak with equal authority and often in the same voice. This approach creates a blurring of boundaries between the narrator and the character's voice, giving the character an unprecedented sense of autonomy within the narrative. So in conclusion, Kellman's technique of merging the heterodiegetic narrator's voice with the protagonist's voice allows both voices to operate on the same level, creating a democratic narrative space where neither the author's formal literary style nor the character's more colloquial language dominates. This technique effectively equalizes the language in the text, allowing the character's voice to have the same weight and prominence as the authorial voice. This stylistic innovation serves both to immerse the reader in the protagonist's lived experience and to challenge traditional hierarchical distinctions between literary and everyday language. I have here the important techniques in representing a speech and thought. So the first technique is the free direct discourse. So the free direct discourse is a narrative technique that allows a character's speech or thoughts to be presented directly within the narrative, without any introductory phrases like he said or she thought. This technique combines the immediacy of direct speech with the fluidity of free indirect discourse, which typically represents the character's thoughts or speech in the third person but without quotation marks. So in here, in the first technique, which is the free direct discourse, this narrative technique presents a character's speech or thoughts directly, without the use of quotation marks or reporting verbs. The character's words or thoughts are seamlessly integrated into the narrative, creating a sense of immediacy and intimacy, blurring the line between the character's inner world and the external narrative voice. So, direct discourse, it refers to a technique in which a character's speech or thoughts are quoted verbatim, presented exactly as they are uttered or conceived. This is typically done using quotation marks for speech or sometimes italics for thoughts, to clearly separate the character's words or thoughts from the narrative voice. The key feature of direct discourse is that it provides an unmediated, authentic representation of the character's language, allowing the reader to experience the character's exact words or mental state without any interference or interpretation by the narrator. So, by presenting the character's speech or thoughts directly, this technique helps to create a sense of immediacy and realism, allowing readers to engage more intimately with the character's emotion, reactions, and inner world. It also provides a clear distinction between the narrator's voice and the characters, making the character's voice more distinct and giving the reader direct access to their perspective at the moment in the narrative. So in the third technique, which is the indirect discourse, also known as indirect speech or reported speech, refers to the technique where a character's speech for thoughts are reported or paraphrased by the narrator, rather than quoted verbatim. Unlike direct discourse, which presents the character's exact words in quotation marks, indirect discourse conveys what the character has said or thought through a transformation of the words, typically adjusting the original speech or thought to fit the narrator's perspective. So the next technique is the narrator's representation of speech or thought. It refers to how a narrator conveys the spoken or internalized words of characters in a text. It is an essential element in narrative style, shaping how characters' voices, emotions, and ideas are presented to the reader. There are several key ways in which a narrator can represent speech and thought, each offering different levels of immediacy, intimacy, and perspective. So, in the narrator's representation of speech and thought, refers or it plays a crucial role in shaping how characters' voices, emotions, and ideas are presented to the reader, influencing the narrative's tone, depth, and perspective. The way speech and thought are represented can affect the reader's engagement with the character's psychological world and overall flow of narrative. So the last technique was the narrator's representation of action. So it's an essential element that shapes how events unfold in a narrative. Through choices in pacing, detail, symbolic interpretation, and psychological context, the narrator determines how actions are experienced by the reader. So this representation affects not only the plot and the progression of events, but also the emotional engagement and thematic resonance of the story. By manipulating how action is presented, the narrator can influence how readers perceive characters, events, and the deeper meanings of the text. So in the last technique, which is the narrator's representation of action, it refers to how the narrator describes and presents the physical events and behaviors that take place in the story. This element is fundamental because it shapes not only the plot, the sequence of events, but also how readers experience those events and how they interpret the emotions, motivations, and psychological states of the characters involved. The way action is narrated has a direct impact on the pacing of the narrative, the level of detail provided, and the symbolic meaning that the action may carry. So on the last technique, which is the representation of action by the narrator, is a powerful tool in shaping how events are perceived by the reader. And the narrator influences not only the structure of the plot, but also the emotional engagement and thematic meaning of the story. Whether through vivid descriptions or minimalist portrayals, the narrator's choices in how action is conveyed have a profound effect on how the reader interprets and connects with the narrative. So the next topic is the metaphor. So metaphor is one of the figure of speech in which one thing is described in terms of another, typically to create a deeper or more vivid understanding of the original concept. Metaphors are central to both literary and everyday language, functioning as powerful tools for conveying meaning, evoking emotions, and shaping perceptions. In investigations within cognitive linguistics and psychology generally have proposed models for the function of metaphor and introduce terminology such as grounds, targets, and source, or variations of this to illustrate the ways in which meaning is carried over from one term to another. So an understanding of these concepts allow the writer to pinpoint and develop effective metaphor and to understand the ways they work on the reader, and also to avoid some of the common problems of metaphor writing. So in metaphor writing, there are several common problems that can arise, which can undermine the clarity, effectiveness, and originality of the metaphor. These include the first one is the mixed metaphors. The second one is incompatible metaphors. The third one is the danger of cliches. So what is mixed metaphors? So a mixed metaphors occurs when two or more incompatible or contradictory metaphors are used together, often leading to confusion or a jarring or illogical effect. This happen or this happens when the writer combines metaphors that don't belong together, creating a sense of disjointedness or absurdity. So mixing metaphors can confuse the reader because it creates contradictory images or concepts, making it unclear what the writer is trying to convey. It can weaken also the overall impact of the metaphor and make the writing feel unpolished or awkward. So the next problem is the incompatible metaphor. It refers to the internally inconsistent or that involve comparing elements that don't logically or naturally fit together. While mixed signal metaphors involve multiple metaphors, the incompatible metaphors refer to a single metaphor that contains elements that don't align or support each other, undermining the clarity and cohesion of the comparison. So the problem is, when metaphors are incompatible, the intended meaning becomes unclear. The reader might struggle to understand the nature of the comparison, and the metaphor's effectiveness is diluted. It can also disrupt the flow of the writing and break the reader's suspension of disbelief. So the last problem in writing a metaphor is danger of cliché. So cliché in metaphor writing refers to a metaphor that has become overused and trite, losing its impact and originality. Cliched metaphors are often so familiar and repetitive that they no longer evoke fresh insights or emotional responses. Instead, they sound predictable and unoriginal. So, the problem of cliched metaphors are ineffective because they fail to engage the reader's imagination or provide fresh insight. They may even distract the reader, making the writing feel lazy or formulaic. In literary and creative context, relying on cliches can prevent a writer from achieving the depth, originality, and emotion that effect metaphor use can bring to the text. So next topic is the future directions. So future directions refers to the emerging trends, areas of interest, and evolving approaches in the study of style, language, and text analysis. Stylistics as a discipline is continually evolving, influenced by new technological advancement, interdisciplinary approaches, and the changing nature of language used in society. So, in future direction of stylistics is an interdisciplinary field that examines how language is used in literature, speech, and other forms of communication, focusing on the choices writers or speakers make in their use of language and how these choices after meaning, tone, and perception. So as society and language evolve, stylistics also adapts to new development in technology, linguistics, and cultural context. In short, the future direction of stylistic is dynamic and multifaceted, shaped by technological advancement, interdisciplinary connections, and the evolving nature of language use in society. As new tools, methods, and cultural trends emerge, stylistics will continue to expand its focus, looking not only at the mechanics of language and style, but also at the broader social, psychological, and cultural forces that shape how we communicate and interpret meaning, whether through computational analysis, multimodal text, or critical approaches. Stylistics is poised to engage with the complex, ever-changing landscape of modern communication. And that ends my discussion. Thank you for watching.